Hey, what is going on, guys? Lurkin here from Mobalytics, and we finally got the PTR patch notes. They were certainly withholding a lot from us. Maybe they could have thrown a couple of them in there so we didn't panic, but here we are. Like the guy from Shawshank, we are free. We are free and liberated from burning, conjurations, devouring blaze, and splintering. The overall vibe for the next season is that shock and pyro builds stocks, they're way up. Frost builds will not be good next season. They didn't get as much as the rest of them. The idea was to tear everything down to its roots, which I'll go over, and then we can rebuild from the ashes. And there were certainly some pretty sizable buffs in a few specific spots to help bring us up from the ashes, from the loss of devouring blaze damage on shock and lightning, on shock and frost builds, and the last of conj mastery on every build that isn't a conj build, which are now summons. The biggest thing I'm looking forward to next season is ball lightning with Okun's catalyst right here. So the gravitational aspect is now this unique focus, which is awesome. BL can be cast while moving, get some attack speed, some DR, some ranks, and chance for BL to cast twice. And it's just got this whole static field thing, and it scales with for each active ball lightning out and stuff like that, and you get unhindered. It's looking really good. Let's move on. So I'm going to first talk about the general loot buffs. So barter caches were a little mid. They got buffed. They're now going to scale up with world tier, a bunch of different caches, etc. Ancestral aspects are now going to drop at like what the max for a legendary would drop. So you know how shredding blades, say it's got the 15 to 35% range. A legendary will drop between 15 and 30, and an ancestral will always drop between 30 and 35. So if you actually get an ancestral aspect of the one you want, there's a really good chance it's an upgrade, or it's better than any legendary. There's going to be less variance on unique affixes. I think they went a little overboard with the ranges that they did a while back. Like Tal Rasha damage range 10 to 25%. Maybe they tightened it up to 15 to 25. And the more greater affixes that a unique has, the higher the affix floor will be. So maybe for Tal Rasha, maybe a 4GA unique, 4GA Rasha has a value of 20 to 25%. So like it's always going to be usable. Horde Compass is now stacked to 99, which is awesome. We all know they were a bit much. Maybe they could do boss mats next. And the general chance for an ancestral item to drop has been increased. So loot stocks up. Basically just the loot in general is going to be a bit better. There were no changes to tempering. I think tempering's okay right now. And the biggest change that needs to be addressed next is masterworking. Masterworking really need to increase the obusite cost and have the reset only peel back 4 layers. This is Diablo. This is not an esport. The only thing, the grinders are always going to do what it takes to get it, but the only people they're hurting are the casuals and stuff like that. So it's whatever. Touch on this quick. Conjurations are now summons. I don't think really this changes much for Sorcerer in general. I think we had okay scaling. I'm not going to go over it all now, but all conjurations, etc., stuff like that, they're all going to get a tag now called summons. A lot of the wording has changed, and basically what it does is there probably were some inconsistencies in damage scaling that we never really noticed about just because of how things are worded, like this deals more damage or you deal more damage, etc., etc. So now all your conjuration scaling should be a lot more consistent, and we probably won't really run into any issues. I say that. All right, but basically the vibe of the season is the Rotten House was torn down. It was a full demo. The dev focus for Season 7 was to tear it all down and give us a new foundation to build from. I will rebuild Krypton from the ashes of this planet. Devouring Blaze is now only for direct damage fire crits, which is awesome. I know it's a damage loss, but there's things they offset. Conjuration Mastery is now Primordial Bindings. It only boosts conjuration damage. The other bonuses stay, so you still probably will want to have some form of conjuration in your builds, whether it's like casting. Usually it's going to be like casting Ice Blades and Ice Blade Enchant because of the cooldowns that the Ice Blades give you. And the mana regen that you get, so it's still going to be nice to take 3 ranks in Conj Mastery. Well, in PB. It's going to be nice to take 3 ranks in PB so that you can get some mana and move speed out of it, even if it's not buffing all of your damage. It's still really nice. I love what they did with it. The overall vibe for me is I'm a big fan. Splintering aspect, also a huge fan of this. But we'll see how its power ends up. The change from the flat damage aspect to... All right, let me go ahead and do it first. So now it's an extension of Spear. It scales and still has the 5 chain, but it scales Spear's damage. That's the Lightning Spear skill percentage damage. At 5 ranks, Lightning Spear only gets about 22.6%. And, you know, it works out to about a fourth, maybe, of the damage that it had in the past. But it's going to be a standalone conj build with, I would say, Ball Lightning, Charge Bolts, or Spark as the generator to make spears during unstable currents. And the damage losses should be partially offset if a few things happen. Well, if one thing happens, if the splintering scaling is fixed to actually use the critical strike damage bonus that you can get to around 2,500, as opposed to the additive bonus that we get at about 1,400%. So you're if this gets fixed, you gain 40% damage. And then we talk about what's coming up, the changes to Ceaseless and Static Surge, giving you even more damage. So splintering should still be good. It's just another season. It's going to look a little bit different. I think it's going to be very similar to how it was built and scaled this season. It's just now maybe you take a different glyph or two, something like that. And there were buffs to random, some passive changes in Paragons to offset losses, and they mainly affected Shock and Pyro builds. Frost builds got next to nothing, but you know, we got Fire and we got Shock this season. Everyone's going to want to play the new Ball Lightning. So it's okay if Frost builds can sit a backseat for a season. I think the issue is, you know, I think there were some layoffs at Microsoft, and I think the team isn't as big as it was in the past, and maybe we were a little bit too harsh on them for some of the changes. Like I certainly know I was, like, you know, overreacting to the mid-season buffs, etc. And I think it's just coming down to it's a manpower issue, and you can only get so much done, and you want to make sure things aren't broken. So you can only change so much at once without worrying about bugging everything, which is probably going to happen anyway, but that's okay. So Paragon Changes. Let's get into these ones. So Ceaseless Conduit is now 60% damage for having a crackling energy charge, and this is all damage. I'm a little bit concerned about this because it feels like it's going to become mandatory to run Mystical Teleport to make crackling so that you can get the 60% damage. It starts at 10% and it scales up very easily with intelligence to get to 60%. And then, you know, when you're at full charge, you get triple crackling energy damage until all the charges are gone. Yada, yada, yada. Who cares about that? So I'm concerned that Frost and Pyro builds, if they don't have a legendary node that they can take, which most don't, to gain more damage, they're going to end up running this board that doesn't really do anything for them, just so that they can run Mystical Teleport, make crackling, and get 60% damage. I really hope it gets changed to shock damage. It replaces Enchantment Master. So yeah, in the current setup, a lot of builds are running Enchantment Master as like their 5th flex board, because you have your starter, Fundamental Release, and Frigid Fate as mandatory, and then you have a 4th board, which is, you know, something build specific like Icefall or Searing Heat or something like that, Burning Instinct. And then, you know, the 5th board was always a bit of a flex, and because of Enlightenment, we ended up going with Enchantment Master because it gave us a bunch of non-fizz, some attack speed, DR, and just made our teleport enchants faster. But I'm thinking now that Ceaseless Conduit, if it stays the way it is, it's sort of going to usurp Enchantment Master in about every build. And again, you're gonna get squishier because you're gonna have to run Mystical Teleport instead of Shimmering. Shimmering is the one that gives you damage reduction, and now you're gonna like always want to find a way to make crackling in the build so that you can get this damage. Static Surge, if you hit something with a shock skill 8 times in a second, you get 40% damage with 8 seconds, and you restore 30% mana. You can't refresh it during the 8 seconds. Or else it might be a bit too busted because of the restoring 30% mana. I like this change. I think, unlike Ceaseless Conduit, if this one stays all damage, I think it can be a bit cumbersome for Frost builds and Pyromancy builds that aren't Frozen Orb. to proc this, like, you know, the hit with shock 8 times in 1 second to get the 40% damage. I think it's going to be very cumbersome for them to do that, and I don't think it'll be worth it. So I think it'll be really good for shock builds, and it's going to be really good for Frozen Orb, because Frozen Orb has the lightning spears hitting everything all the time, so that's great. Fundamental release it's the same as it was, but now you get 40% ultimate damage. There's some scaling with non-fizz, but with all the scaling in the Paragon, you just always hit the max bonus anyway. It's not very difficult, so that's 40% ult damage, and that's going to actually be really good. We'll get into the ults. I think it's next. Burning Instinct and Searing Heat were changed, but the damage is the same. Basically, Searing Heat, it scales off your crit damage bonus now. You're going to hit it for free. And Burning Instinct, instead of crit damage, it uses intelligence and fire damage. You're going to get it for free. So that's fine. Conjurer Glyph, instead of 20% Conjuration duration, it was replaced with 15% Conjuration crit chance. That's okay. It's pretty good. I mean, it's sort of, I don't know. It frees up. Basically, it frees up one affix somewhere that you don't need to hit anymore, because your lightning spears will have 15% more crit chance. And damage reduction to burning is now DR well healthy, so we really are free from burning, like actually free from burning. Ultimate changes, these ones are huge. Oh, Inferno. So at 5 ranks, Inferno is now going to make all enemies inside of it vulnerable. That's really awesome. Burning builds don't have the best way to apply vulnerable. A lot of the times it's been lucky hit vulnerable and ice blades, which is spotty, or casting lightning spear. So you still have some options, but now you have Inferno to do it now. But the biggest change is with the Supreme, the final end node. Now I think Inferno lasts 8 seconds or 6 seconds, something like that. So now while it's active, all your pyro skills are free to cast and deal 50% more damage. It's actually insane. Basically, permanent uptime on Inferno is now mandatory on all fire builds. So whether you do that through, you would basically have 2 options to get permanent uptime in Inferno. It's like you either like run flicker steps, or you do some combination of cooldown reduction with Rakanoth's boots and Iceblade enchantment and Inferno cooldown reduction tempers and maybe Orange Herald. So, but like if all else fails, just put flicker steps on, and then you get your 50% damage buff, but you just have to evade a bunch now. Unstable Currents didn't really get shit. At 5 ranks, you're now going to get a 3-second stun on cast. Maybe it's a really big stun, but Unstable Currents really didn't need anything. It was already really good. It makes a bunch of shock skills, which isn't that good now because, the conjurations aren't going to scale all your damage, but like making all the shock skills, it still is damage, and you get the 25% attack speed, and it's still pretty nice. So I think Unstable Currents is still fine. And Deep Freeze, I don't really know what to think of it. I think it has potential, and I just hope it doesn't fall short, and I hope it doesn't make everything really complicated. So when you have 5 ranks in Deep Freeze, the Deep Freeze damage is going to be increased by 40% of your vulnerable damage bonus. And you can get anywhere between like 3,500 to 4,000 vulnerable damage bonus. So let's just say 3,500, let's times it by 0.4. So that's going to be a 1,400% bonus, and then maybe some more if you really get good gear, 1,600%, etc. You're going to get a 1,400% damage bonus to Deep Freeze. So the way Deep Freeze works is Deep Freeze has like a small skill percentage that it lasts 4 seconds. You're encased in ice, and it's got, it deals like some chill damage that has a low skill percentage during that 4 seconds. And at the end of Deep Freeze, it deals a burst of 125% skill damage. And you can proc this by canceling it early. So Deep Freeze has potential to do a lot of damage in Frost builds. And I think it's going to play really well with Blizzard that has Frozen Tundra. It's just, there's always concerns of, well, now it's another damage source that we have to scale, but at least it's the vulnerable damage bonus, so you can just take, a bunch of vulnerable damage, And as we saw with Fundamental Release, we always take this node anyways, but you're going to get 40% alt damage for free. So Deep Freeze has some potential to sort of help shock builds. I think it's going to come down to you're going to want really good uptime on it, and you're just going to pop Deep Freeze and unpop it. Like pop, pop, use it, and then let it burst. Cancel it, let it burst. And then when the Deep Freeze ends, you gain a 50% max life barrier for 8 seconds. So if you can have really good uptime on your Deep Freeze, it's just going to be like a nice little nuke. And if you are in a sticky situation, you can just sit in Deep Freeze for those 4 seconds. So I will be putting Deep Freeze on every single Frost build now, and I will be running Enlightenment so that I can buff up its damage even more, because Avalanche will not buff its damage. I think Avalanche is on the chopping block for getting an actual big rework. I think the technology just wasn't there, and they didn't have the time. So they just gave it like some random little buff in case you wanted to use it. But Deep Freeze is going to be sweet. Inferno and Deep Freeze are really cool. Inferno's the biggest winner out of all of this. Like the 50% damage is just pretty insane. There were a lot of big passive changes. So the biggest one was Freedom from Burning. So Devouring Blaze is now 10% X crit strike damage with pyro skills. If you take 3 ranks in it and then you get 7 on your amulet, that's going to be 100% damage at 10 ranks. The biggest one I'm actually looking out for is Shocking Impact. This has been a meme for a long time, but it's pretty cool. You can get ranks of it on Raiment. Now every time you stun an enemy or attempt to stun a boss, I think it's attempt to stun a boss or unstoppable, I forget, but anytime you attempt to stun them, so that's like apply a stagger, something like that, it now procs for the 50% damage, 100% damage, 150% damage at 3 ranks. I think this has some potential. So we'll see how that ends up panning out in the PTR. I'm not totally sure, but more on it later. But you can get ranks to Shocking Impact now as a temper on your weapons. So I think Shocking Impact has the most potential on a splintering build, because there really isn't a good weapon temper that you can take on the splintering build, because you're just using the main skill to create the spears. You don't really care about its damage, so you can afford to lose the weapon tempers. I don't really see Shocking Impact having too big of a thing on, Chain Lightning, Charge Bolts, or Ball Lightning, like those dedicated builds. But on the splintering build, where you're just using them as a vehicle, you should definitely be speccing into Shocking Impact. So Inner Flames is now 4% all damage while healthy. So instead of sinking 3 points into DB, you just sink them now into 3 points in Inner Flames. And Icy Touch is now 4% damage to vulnerable enemies instead of just cold damage to vulnerable enemies. So, 12% damage for all builds now. So that's cool. Conj Mastery is now Primordial Bindings. You gain a stacking bonus for each active summon, up to 10 summons. It's 2% summoning damage, 2% move speed, and 4% mana regen. So the mana regen here and the move speed is why I think it's still 3 ranks in Conj Mastery, still has a place in most every build. But it's not mandatory for damage now. Like, you don't need to get as many conjurations as you can for damage. It's just sort of nice to have. So at 10 ranks, which is, 3 in the skill tree, 7 on the amulet, you have 10 ranks, 10 summons. That's a 200% summon damage bonus. And then they also fixed an issue where automatic casts of Familiar were not always lightning based if spawned by unstable currents. Hopefully this is Winter Glass 2. And this sort of ties in with the free from burning. We don't need to apply burning anymore because there's no DR burning, and the warmth passive isn't mandatory. You can just run a lucky hit chance to heal defensive temper. But hopefully for Winter Glass 2, it makes frozen whatever they are, familiars. That way you can use the invoked skill node to get 10% damage with that skill. So that's awesome. And they fixed an issue where the Sorcerer's Familiar was not triggering the Shocking Impact passive. So that's also really cool. So now, when the Lightning Familiar from Unstable Current stuns, it'll trigger Shocking Impact. So the hottest new thing on the block again is Ball Lightning. There's 2 new uniques, and then it got all the damage from Ceaseless Conduit and the Static Surge legendary nodes. The enhanced, so I'll go over what changed with the nodes. The enhanced node used to be some really weird convoluted tick rate thing, which was great, but now they just simplified it. I think maybe because of server issues, etc. with the ticks. It's now just you get 25% attack speed. If it's bucket 1 attack speed, then this is sort of meh, especially when you look at Okun's giving you attack speed. Like we're so brimmed on bucket 1, it's annoying. Wizards, which is one of the end nodes, casting BL now makes 2 crackling. You don't have to like hit enemies. That's probably so that it can work with Stormhorn. And I'm going to go over each of these in the next slides. And if you don't want, basically, if you're struggling with mana, you can run Wizards and make 2 crackling on cast. Or if you want more damage, you run Mages for 30% damage to stun. So you like start with Wizards and then switch to Mages when you're able to. And the Gravitational aspect is now a utility aspect. The Okun's focus is now gravitational. The functionality has moved to a unique item, which is great. So after creating 2 Ball Lightnings, it just says creating 2 Ball Lightnings. It doesn't say casting. So this could be BL enchant. As well. Your next cast implodes, dealing 90% weapon damage and pulls close enemies. This may, now that I'm thinking about it, so it basically, Ball Lightning always needed to run Raiment because it needed a pull. So what they did was they changed Grav to be a utility aspect that gives you a pull. After you create the 2 BLs, the cast implodes, dealing 90% damage and pulls close enemies in. And this scales with BL ranks, so the damage will scale with BL ranks. My only concern is that, like, after you create the 2 Ball Lightnings, when you do your next cast, it says it implodes. So it sounds like it just disappears. So this could end up being like a damage loss because you're losing that 3rd cast. And then maybe what if you're running BL enchant and it works with it? And then like every cast is imploding. So then it's just dealing, this weapon damage and pulling in close enemies. But Gravitational is kind of cool. Maybe, there is some play here with some like meme hybrid type stuff where you run the Gravitational aspect. And because your skill bar is a bit more free now, say you're running Chain Lightning with BL enchant, and then every time you want to pull, you just cast your Ball Lightning, and that thing will implode and pull enemies in for you without even having to like cast it a bunch. So that could be cool, because I know a lot of people don't really like running Raiment. You get so squishy. So that's just something to think of. There's options now, and there's a lot of cool ways that these could interact. So, Okun's Catalyst. I'm pretty excited for this. So it's a unique focus, which is awesome. Ball Lightning can be cast while moving. You get a bunch of attack speed for 5 seconds after casting a defensive skill. And look at this, it's at 35% base. If this is cap 1, if you GA this and then masterwork it up, you're basically going to fulfill all your attack speed requirements with just this focus. So that means Starless is still going to be great, but you're not going to want attack speed on any other piece of gear, just this Catalyst, and you'd want the core ranks on Starless. So we'll see. And then you get DR for each active Ball Lightning. That's awesome. Ranks the Ball Lightning. Never say no to that. And chance for BL projectiles to cast twice. That's awesome. So I'm not entirely sure how this works now. So Ball Lightning orbits you and creates a static field that damages all enemies within you for 180% of Ball Lightning's damage per active ball and grants unhindered. So what it sounds like is instead of Ball Lightning rotating around you and dealing a tick, like that's why they got rid of enhanced. It's attack speed now and not tick rate. So I don't think BL orbits around you and ticks anymore. I think they just orbit around you, and then in their orbit they create a big lightning damage field. So you're literally just a roving lightning field. Lightning's all on the ground on you, and it's just damaging everything. And for every Ball Lightning that you have in orbit, the static field will deal more damage, and it looks like it scales really hard. It's 180% of Ball Lightning's damage, which that's already, it's 80% more damage than just the cast. And then per active ball, so like two balls is 360%, 540, 720, You know, some 1260, some 1800s, stuff like that. So that's awesome. And then it says of ball lightning's damage per active ball. Maybe that's only in orbit. You know, my initial thought was maybe BL enchant will work. And like if you get a bunch of BLs out, then it'll really scale it. We'll see. But I'm excited for that. The build's going to be ran as pure. I'm really excited that splintering doesn't seem like it's going to be mandatory in every build. It's not going to be mandatory in every build anymore because it's going to have a dedicated build. And then Strike of Stormhorn, it seems cool. I'm not as excited for this one as I am for Okun's Catalyst, but I think this is a good item. So it's got some crit strike damage, some projectile speed, ranks to BL, and chance for BL to cast twice. So the big thing here now is this is really, instead of the whole orbiting static field thing, this one is playing fully into the single line straight cast, like you are casting this mega ball lightning. And basically, it's going to be a straight line ball lightning that deals, 2x damage because it's 100% increased damage. And it'll stun enemies if it hits max range. It looks so it's going to just go through enemies, and then this chance for ball lightning projectiles to cast twice. This, instead of it casting 2 BLs, it'll cast a super ball lightning. When the projectile to cast twice would proc, it will now just proc a super ball lightning, which is going to deal another 100% more damage. So it just becomes this mega ball that goes out. And then it's got more lucky hit chance, and it's got higher stun duration. So I think it's going to be really good as well. I think everyone's going to want to play Okun's though, just because it sounds better. But I think Strike of Stormhorn will have some play. I'm going to try to make a build that can sort of swap between Okun's and Stormhorns on a win. But the only thing that becomes an issue is Okun's having that attack speed and Stormhorn not. So you I don't know. But so, and it gives you higher LHC when you get the Super Ball Lightning. So maybe BL Enchant has some cool play with it. Maybe Frostburns. I'm not totally sure. So enchantments, sorry folks. Yeah, we got a Firebolt enchant nerf and nothing else. So I don't think enchantments made it onto the chopping block this season. I think this guy had his hands full with whatever he was doing. So now Firebolt, instead of it applying a burn, it now, when you deal burning damage, it has a chance to heal you. I don't know. I could see this okay for leveling, but whatever. Flame Shield. So now taking 30% of your life within 2 seconds activates Flame Shield. It can only happen once every 30 seconds. It used to be some convoluted thing with 100% damage of your max. I don't know. But so I don't think Flame Shield's obviously still not going to be ran in core. I don't think it's bad for hardcore, but mainly if you wanted to run the Firebird aspect that gives it for free. But no, this ain't making any waves. But I think it's a good change for it. And there were some changes to some skill tree nodes. Nothing major, but it was in the right direction. So basically, Enhanced Spark. These all now scale with the skill ranks. So Enhanced Spark had some chance to deal skill damage, and it chained. If it was a single target, Spark dealt 20% more damage. So now this will scale up with your Spark skill ranks. So who knows? Maybe a Spark Varathio build could be good. Enhanced Fireball, that 10% skill damage burn that it had, it's now going to scale up with Fireball ranks, so you can use Greater Fireball more if you want. I don't know. And then Enhanced Familiar, probably the one everyone actually cares about. The 40% skill damage burn, specifically in Hydra Familiar builds. Those are two things you really want to use together. The 40% burn is now going to scale with ranks. All right, so these are just some random changes. The aspect of Tenuous Destruction, it's the offensive one where you had no defensives on the bar, I think. It's now 50% damage. It's really interesting. I think it actually, there's some things that are going to allow it to be used. But I probably won't build around this, but if you really want max damage, this'll be it. You just drop, yeah. And then Tenuous Agility, it's like a mobility one. It's like if you don't use a defensive skill for 8 seconds, you get more move speed or something like that, whatever. The biggest one here actually is recharging. We brought this up a long time ago that when you go to Zenith, the Zenith dungeon, and you get the Codex recharging, it has an aspect value of 1, which isn't high enough to like use for chain lightning leveling. And by the time you find a better recharging, you've already gotten, you're in Torment 4 basically is what happens. So what's cool about it is that now the minimum is 2.5. Aspect of Searing Wards, I don't know. This still isn't going to get ran, but it's like Firewall slows enemies. It destroys missiles and immobilizes anything with the initial cast. Yeah, that's cool. But that's a defensive aspect, so we're not using that. Armageddon, I'm not sold on this one, but it's a good change. So it used to be like during Inferno, meteorites would fall and your meteorites immobilize enemies, but now it's meteorites fall during Inferno. Your meteorites immobilize enemies for 3 seconds. So that's still, basically they added this. While Inferno is active, your meteorites deal 300% increased damage. My initial thought is they're really trying to make like a meteor/meteorite build happen, but it's a bit hard because to get the meteorite deal double damage tempers, you have to give up the meteor damage tempers. So it's like, I don't know. I think this could be cool for the mid game, like if you're running the Ton rune. I think it's Ton where you drop meteorites. I don't know. I don't see myself trying to spec into meteorites on meteor. I think you still just wanna use, I don't know. There could be some play here with Shattered Stars and Armageddon. It's something I'll look into, but I'm not totally sure on it yet. It's dicey scaling it all. It's hard to scale both the meteors and the meteorites. That's where I'm getting at. And unique items, the Sidhe bindings, whatever they're called. Those are the familiar gauntlets. The non-physical damage effects has been replaced with ranks through primordial binding. I will certainly use this on Hydra, but I probably won't use this on splintering because, when you have 10 ranks to Conj Mastery, you're getting a 200% damage buff. So it's actually 3x damage because it's 200%, so 3. So it'd be 3.7 divided by 3. So it's actually a 23% damage buff. This is a typo. But yeah, if you get like an extra 7 ranks to Conj Mastery, with it capping at 10 stacks, it's going to equate to, like 23-25% damage. So don't really, that's cool and all, but that's really only going to be a Hydra Familiar thing, I think. But that's really good for that build. But for splintering, I don't think so. I think you're better off just running like Conceited or Intercom with some critical strike damage gloves. You know what I mean? Tempering. So these are just a quick one. There's a new prismatic tempering. It's chance for Ice Blade to cast twice, chance for Inferno to deal double damage, and ranks to Shocking Impact. This is going to be, I'm pretty sure it's a weapon temper because Inferno to deal double damage was on weapon temper. So that's awesome. You can have an Inferno based build if you really want. We'll see if we end up having a dedicated Inferno build. Who knows? And then ranks the Shocking Impact, which is awesome. But basically, the Ice Blades were removed from another temper, and Inferno double damage was removed from another temper to make this new one. The down bad is Frost builds. Winter Glass, as you can see, it has Conj Mastery, but that doesn't give it any damage, and we've received no word what it's going to get to offset it. There's no passive currently that it could use that will give it equivalent damage to what Frozen Orb was able to get with the 10 ranks to Conj Mastery that this amulet could get. So, like, what's going to happen to it? And then Northwar had a really good suggestion. Maybe Frozen Orb can get the summon tag. That way, Frozen Orb now counts as like a conjuration, a summon, and it can use the new Conj Mastery, the new primordial bindings to spruce up the damage of all the conjurations that it's making. You could probably, it could, if that's the case, it could end up becoming like the new default splintering build. And that would be pretty cool. So that's where I'm at with that. And Frost builds are most likely going to suffer this season and hopefully receive some buffs in Season 8. Avalanche is still a joke. I think they weren't able to give it what it needed. I think Asus Ferocity needs buffs still and Verse Mastery, etc. But we'll get on that later. I'll give feedback more. I don't want to overwhelm the guy. I've given a lot of feedback, but Avalanche needs to be a buff to all cold damage for set duration, and it needs to be a higher value. And then Frozen Memories can increase the duration, yada yada yada. But that's just that's a can of worms. Piercing Cold Changes. They're okay at best for Ice Shards. They're 10% per pierce. Again, boss damage. It didn't really get that much. There's some changes to runes. Getting tired here. It's okay. So the biggest one here is like this ritual rune. So, Conjuration builds always sort of had some issues generating offering. So now you can get 600 offering if you have at least one summon for 6 seconds. This will be really good for if there's like a rune that you want to overflow really hard. So like if you're able to maintain 6 summons at once after 6 seconds, you'll get 600 offering, and you'll just shit out all the offering into whatever your thing was. And there's some overflow stuff, so that's cool. This one's really awesome. It generates stores offering every 0.3 seconds. Cast a non-basic skill to gain the stored offering. This just sounds like get 25 offering per second, and like you can start a fight with the 500 offering, like say you're doing bosses or something like that. This just sounds like a generic 25 offering per second for doing nothing. Invocation runes. This one I'm kind of interested about. Cloudburst. It's 220% weapon damage. It only costs 20 offering and invokes Druid lightning bolts, which we can scale up with. We have a lot of ways to scale our lightning damage, etc. So I think this could be a really cool thing to run on Ball Lightning. You could run Ohm. You run Tam Ohm for your Warcry, and then you can run something with Cloudburst to make a bunch of lightning bolts. So that's awesome. I think that's cool. We'll see if it's good. The knock rune, you gain. They nerfed it a little bit. Whatever. That's afflict crowd control. Seer is cool. So let's see. Offering increased to 5 to 300. So cast the same non-channeled skill 3 times. So this is basically a rune for basic skills. You cast Arc Lash 3 times, you get 300 offering. You cast Arc Lash 5 times, or you cast any 5 skills, and then you get 300 offering, and then it's got a 3-second cooldown. That's what exhausted means. You can't reproc it. So once the 3 seconds are up, you can cast 5 more skills, any skill, and you can get 300 offering. So this is really awesome. Like if your build doesn't really have a good way to generate offering, it's a basic skill build or something, you can use this with the Cry rune, and I don't know. It's cool. Moni was the one where every time, I think it was after moving, you'd cast a skill, you'd get 25 offering. It was kind of broken if you just like stutter stepped. But now basically cast 2 mobility skills and you get 100 offering. So that's not terrible for teleport enchantment if you got nothing else. And then Zal, I think they just buffed the max life. So the overflow used to be increase the duration of the max life, I think. And now you're going to gain more max life if you have more than 300 offering when you proc it. Increase the cooldown from 1 to 3 seconds to avoid overriding the overflow bonuses. All right, that's all I got. I wanted to go back to one thing. Shocking Impact. Let me find it. All right. Shocking Impact. So Shocking Impact is basically a can of worms. So they've shown that they are able to proc an effect off of you attempting to stun a boss. Or it's basically you applying a stagger to a boss. Because when you attempt to stun a boss, you're applying a stagger. Something like that. So this has opened the door because you have glyphs like the Winter Glyph that you need to apply chill. And you can't apply chill to a boss. So they could probably fix the Winter Glyph by, when you attempt to chill a boss, etc. And there's a few aspects, there's a few nodes. Like if you look at all the Frostbolt nodes, it has to deal with hitting a frozen enemy or this and that. So I think down the line we may see some, just some quality of life and some changes that come from a lot of the conditionality that we have. I'm not particularly referring to like charged bolts having a damage to stun node. I'm just referring to like things like the umbral aspect requiring you to apply a crowd control, or I don't know. There's a lot of things in Sorcerer's kit and in the game in general where you need to apply this crowd control to proc this or proc that, and it affects every class. Necro especially has a lot of them, and it ends up making the stuff unusable. So I think this change with Shocking Impact just opened a massive can of worms to fixing a lot of things that don't work because of bosses, and not just because of bad stagger mechanics, but just because you can't apply a chill to a boss. And then bosses aren't considered chilled, so you can't really benefit from the frostbite glyph, etc. And that's all I really have. Overall, yeah, this is about where I'm at. I'm pretty happy with all these changes. I'm not too upset. I know some people are probably going to cry about losing Conj Mastery and losing Dev Blaze. Where's the damage going to come from? But, the changes to Static Surge and Ceaseless Conduit alone showed that they have the balls and the gusto to give damage to some places where it's needed. So I think next on the list is enchantments need to get looked at. Enchantments and key passives need to get looked at. Because frost builds are really down bad right now. So I think it's okay. I'm pretty happy with what we got for this season. I'm very happy. I was really negative for a while, but I think, like I said, this right here, there was a bit of a home demo that occurred, and it was necessary. The bathroom was shit. The bathroom was moldy. It was shit. The toilet didn't work that well. So we just had to demo it. And, we got a porta potty right now. So it's usable. It's a nice Porto, too. Shock and Pyro builds are really good right now. But that's about all I got. I'm generally optimistic about this. And that's my honest opinion, everything on it. So we'll see what happens with the PTR. My biggest concern is just Ceaseless Conduit. Is that every build feeling like it has to. It's like we just replaced Devouring Blaze and Conj Mastery with Mystical Teleport and Crackling Energy like charges. Do you know what I mean? Like that's my concern. Is we just traded one thing for another, but that's been brought up. So hopefully that gets addressed. All right, that's it. I'm done rambling. This was a long one. I'll see you guys.